My name is Magnus Bäck. I work at Access with various toolings for CIN and related matters, development tools. So I'm going to talk about the new routing key standard that we recently set in the Sepia architecture guidelines. So first of all, I'm going to start with a little recap of what a routing key actually is, because if you don't work with RabbitMQ and its details on a daily basis, you might have forgotten what it's all about. And then talk about why we make the effort to do the standardization at all. And if we're going to standardize, why not standardize on how REMREM has worked for quite a while? And at the end, we'll talk about the standard itself. So a routing key is a property in a RabbitMQ message that tells the broker how the message should be routed. So a producer would send a message with the routing key attribute to a particular exchange. An exchange is an internal concept within the RabbitMQ broker that sort of segregates different types of messages. And consumers that set up queues, each queue would have one or more so-called bindings to exchanges where they specify an exchange, but also the routing key, or really a routing key pattern that they're interested in. So in this example here, we have 3 queues all bound to the Eiffel exchange, where the first one uses the foo.star pattern. So the message on the left with the foo.bar routing key would get routed to that queue because the star matches any string except not a period or a dot. The second queue is bound to the Eiffel exchange with the hash wildcard, meaning it doesn't care about the routing key, it just receives everything from the exchange. But the final queue, the foo.bars, will not get the message because foo.bars is not equal to foo.bar. So what's so useful about this then? Well, having well-defined routing keys for Eiffel events, that would allow consumers to actually filter on which events they're interested in. Most consumers will not want to receive every single event. The service that takes events and put them in the event repository obviously wants to receive all events, but the vast majority of the services are only interested in maybe 1 or 2 or 3 event types. And filtering events already in the broker, well, that reduces the load on both the broker and the consumer. I think as Christopher talked about this morning, Ericsson a few years ago had, was it 2 million events per day? We're currently at around 400,000 at Access, so it's quite a few events. And sure, 400,000 events spread out over 24 hours isn't that much, and I don't think it's consumers shouldn't have a problem keeping up, really, but it's unnecessary, and it also could create problems if you want to enforce a maximum length of a queue, for example. Then you would have your queue fill up if you have a problem in a consuming service. So you, for some reason, aren't able to consume the messages at the necessary pace. The queue will grow very, very long, even though you're only interested in just a small fraction of all those events. But if we don't have a standardized schema for these routing keys, then the whole concept is completely useless. I know that some Eiffel actors, they use a fixed string as a routing key. For example, just Eiffel. That makes it completely impossible to do any sort of filtering. We actually had an internal request at Access from a team who wanted to apply filtering because they only they get, I think they're interested in just a couple of events every day, and instead they have to filter out 400,000. So REMREM Publish already, which is, as we talked about earlier, a tool for helping out with publishing messages or events. It does have a consistent way of setting the routing keys, which looks like this. So an artifact published message would have a fixed string Eiffel in the beginning, which is good because it allows us to publish other types of messages on the Eiffel bus. And that fixed string at the beginning would allow us to filter out those other messages. But the problem with this standard is the two tokens that follow, the family and the type. So to the human eye, of course, artifact.published is pretty easy to understand that maps to the Eiffel artifact published event. But the family isn't really a defined concept. It's documented in the documentation of Eiffel REMREM semantics, a library used by REMREM Publish, where there's a large table that tells you for each event type what is its family and what is its it's called type here as well, which of course is an overloaded term here. So the problem with this is every single consumer that wants to add a routing key to their queue, and every producer that wants to adhere to this standard, they have to make a copy of this mapping table so that they can produce routing keys like in this example. And that's of course technically easy to do, but it's completely unnecessary. And you would have to consumers that want to add filtering to their queues, they have to find somehow the right place in the documentation where it's stated how they should do their filtering. They would have to do that anyway, in a sense, but it's much easier if you have the actual name of the event stated in the routing key instead of this split into families and types. So the standard we agreed upon instead in Sepia is very similar, but it looks like this. So again, we have the fixed prefix in the beginning, again, to allow for other kinds of events to be published on the bus. That's explicitly allowed in the Sepia standard. I don't think it's a great idea to do so, but it's certainly allowed. The second token is also a family, but we have chosen not to define this in Sepia. So this means that organizations that find a value in defining families, they may do so. But we are not at this moment defining what these families are. And I would want to caution a little bit from defining families, actually, because it's not necessarily useful. A consumer there are so many kinds of useful categorizations that you might want to make. So it's totally possible that someone interested in artifact events wouldn't be interested in all artifact events, but would instead be interested in some other event type as well. So I'm not sure what kind of problem it actually solves. However, we do leave a token for the family if implementations would want to use it. But of course, if you don't, you can just leave that blank. Well, you can't. It can't be blank entirely, but it could be any string. The third token is the literal name of the event type. In this case, Eiffel artifact published event. So this doesn't require any mapping table. It's obviously present in all events that you're going to want to send. So no worries there. Afterwards, there is a token for a tag, which could mean just about anything. That's, again, up to the implementation to decide if they want to attach any meaning to a so-called tag. If you don't want to use tags, you can leave it to like any non-empty string. And finally, you can have the domain of the event, which was also discussed in an earlier session. If you don't use domains, again, you can have any non-empty string here. And at the bottom of the slide here, there's a link to the full definition on the Sepia site. So a couple of examples then. A consumer could use a routing key pattern like this, where the first, well, the star means accept any family, but I want this particular event, and I don't care about any tags or domains. If you indeed don't care about the tags or domains. While a producer that doesn't use the family field or any tags or any domains could just publish an event with this routing key. So in this particular example, the event published by the producer would get picked up by the consumer's queue in this case. So this is a change I hope we can have implemented in all primarily producers, so that we can get better interoperability between different tools. Obviously, for those who already have already use a routing key with a different schema, the migration path could be a little bit tricky. But to ease such a transition, keep in mind that you can certainly have multiple bindings for the same queue. So if you're interested in both artifact creations and artifact published events, you would have one binding for each event type. And if you have multiple routing key schemas in use within your organization, you could have one binding that matches events for the old schema and one that matches for the new schema. And that would allow you to have a seamless transition between the two. And then when all producers using the old schema have stopped using it, you can drop that routing key pattern from the queues. It could still be tricky if you have a big organization, but it's certainly possible. Yeah, I think that's it. Any questions or other comments? All right, thank you.